coming up on this episode of the Roundtable. So I think weirdly, because we've been through all of the sky is falling stuff and now it has turned out to be fine, you are going to get a lot of people who have, as they say, a permission structure to kind of jump ship from the resistance and just, if not become MAGA themselves, then accept MAGA as a force to be reckoned with.
Well, you don't hear the same stuff about this is an illegitimate president that has to be like resisted and destroyed and countered at every turn. I mean, I'm sorry. I kind of feel like Biden, people have talked about this obviously a lot, that Biden sabotaging Kamala's run and like just sort of sabotaging the Democrats generally for having like shoved him out and then turning around and endorsing Kamala before Obama and Pelosi and Schumer got a chance to come up with alternate arrangements. I mean, I don't know. It kind of feels like Biden is doing everything he can to sort of normalize Trump.
Emmett Penny, friend of the pod, sent me a tweet with a picture of Biden's speech after the election. And it just said, "This is the look of a guy who just watched his carjacker get T-boned by a garbage truck." And I think that's amazing. Hello and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and paternity leave editor of the American Mind. I'm filling in for our intrepid managing editor, Mike Savo, while he's on paternity leave. And so we are joined by Seth Barron and publisher and president Ryan Williams. And you guys, I have to tell you, I am not yet tired of winning. I will let you know. I will register when I become tired of winning. Today is not that day. I have to say, this is like a change in the weather or something. I had just gotten used to sort of coping with the Biden administration as best I could. And I had forgotten that it is possible actually to have fun in politics, to feel good about the incoming administration. And so it's a good day. It's morning in America. We've got a lot of appointments to talk about now, a lot of cabinet picks that have come down the pike thick and fast in the week since we last discussed this. So we thought to begin, we would just kind of rattle off some of the big names and some of the latest picks and talk about what it signals for the future of the Trump administration, the good, bad, and the ugly, if there is any. Some of these will probably be old news to our listeners. Susie Wiles, the former campaign manager, will now be chief of staff. She appeared briefly on stage during Trump's victory speech, wandered sort of very uncomfortably across the camera lens, clearly a backstage operative more than a public face, which is kind of promising, I think, for somebody in that role. Seems like a very serious player. Mike Waltz, three-term GOP representative from East Central Florida, is going to be national security advisor. My personal favorite, to tease what we'll be talking about, is Tom Homan, the border czar, kind of the pit bull dad that everybody was trying to make Tim Walz out to be during the Kamala run. He really is that guy who will like smack you down if you get on the wrong side of the good guys. We'll talk about him, I'm sure. Kristi Noem, somebody that has not been greeted with a lot of enthusiasm in Trump world, as so far as I've seen, will be the Homeland Security Secretary. She's, of course, the South Dakota governor and has gotten into some hot water on a number of issues, including, or perhaps especially, the trans stuff. Elise Stefanik, ambassador to the United Nations. You probably remember her from the controversy over Harvard's president and the plagiarism scandals there and the hearings. Stefanik took a very strong role in that. Mike Huckabee is ambassador to Israel. Marco Rubio is going to be Secretary of State. That's a particularly interesting one. Pete Hegseth will be defense secretary. And I'm skipping over a bunch of these. He really has moved quickly here, but just giving some headlines. Tulsi Gabbard will be director of national intelligence. She's obviously one of the new recruits to the Trump team out from sort of outside of the GOP's traditional remit. She is herself a Democrat.
Now former Democrat.
Sorry, former Democrat. Yes, she's a lifelong Democrat. That's right. Yeah, I shouldn't dead name Tulsi Gabbard by associating her with the Democrats. Senate Majority Leader will be John Thune, senator from South Dakota, and Matt Gaetz is going to be Attorney General. We all probably remember him from his government shutdown days not too long ago. So it's a little bit like at the end credits of a movie when the actors come up with shots of themselves in their best moments. I feel like we're getting a who's who of Trump's supporters over the past 4 years and before. Although a diverse array of viewpoints represented, of Republican camps and even non-Republican camps kind of coming into coalition. Yeah, what are you guys' impressions on this cabinet as it shapes up in this administration as it gets going?
What strikes me right off is the youth of the cabinet he's putting together. This is a team. I mean, the oldest people, like Kristi Noem, I think is about 52. The rest, almost all of them, are under 45. Matt Gaetz, J.D. Vance, Vivek. Well, Rubio's like 52.
Stefanik
is about 40. Hegseth is like about 40. I think what he's doing, and it's very intentional, is he's and this is, I think, really refreshing, is that he's looking beyond his own administration and beyond basically his life and deepening the MAGA bench and setting up the presidential contenders of like 20 years from now. I think this is like a very, very smart and very thoughtful way to be taking care of the party that he's inherited and built, and really looking forward to the future of America in terms of trying to, not just make this a one-off, but, Matt Gaetz, J.D. Vance, Hegseth. I mean, these are people you could see running the country someday, and he's giving them the opportunity to like develop the kind of executive experience that they'll need. To me, this is very different from appointing, say, Rex Tillerson or Jeff Sessions or whoever else he had in his first term. The types like old boomers who essentially are used to running things. I mean, he's essentially skipping over Gen X to a large extent. I mean, Rubio is Gen X, but he's staffing it with millennials, and he's looking forward, and I think that's really good.
Yeah, I didn't even mention Elon and Vivek who are going to run they're going to run Doge. They're going to run the Department of Government Efficiency together, but they're two young future prospects as well.
Yeah, it's a good point, Seth. But Wilbur Ross, I think the senior member of the 16 cabinet, who was nearly 80, I think, when he was confirmed. Although, Spencer, I must correct you. I think you're saying all these people will be. I think there may be one or perhaps even two that don't make it, but we'll see. I wonder who the highest risk, I think, is. Maybe Gaetz. If I were a Democratic operative, I would say this young congressman from Florida, and I'm not lending any validity to any of this, but was under investigation by the FBI, or maybe even still has an open file, kind of, that kind of thing. So Scott MacFarlane reports on Twitter that John Fetterman just now, this was about 10 minutes ago, Trump is engaged in, quote, God tier level of trolling to own the libs with his appointments. But yeah, this is it will be an interesting group together too. Maybe, I don't know who's the most interesting. I mean, Gaetz is polarizing, so he's interesting for that.
Well, he's polarizing not just with Democrats, but with Republicans. And if Thune is going to be the Senate Majority Leader, I mean, he's kind of like a conventional Republican, and Gaetz is the one who destroyed McCarthy's speakership. I mean, he's gone after Republican leadership. So I think you're right. If there's anybody that they might rebel against clearing, it might be Gates. I see your point there.
Yeah. Tulsi at DNI is pretty interesting. This is not an original thought of mine. It's from a unnamed friend who works in this world, and I haven't asked his permission, so I'll leave him out. But he's a sort of conventional IR guy in some ways. And so I was surprised to see him really like this pick. And his reasons were she has no institutional ties or access to grind at DNI. We might finally get someone who just wants the proper operation of that agency to proceed. Now, you left out Ratcliffe at CIA, Spencer. That was maybe the one missing, which is an interesting pick. Certainly, I mean, he's definitely not at all any of the ones that might see some trouble. Former DNI director under first Trump administration. So, but yeah, I like the generational shift. I think that's good.
Yeah, Zeldin at EPA. He's like 40.
Yeah. So this will be an interesting drama to watch play out. And a lot of continuing maybe our theme from last week, a lot of mavens of the new media. And I guess you are, just as a matter of course, if you're younger. But this is, I think, it's a bad day for legacy media, sort of diffusely, I guess, or implicitly, and also a bad day for Ukraine, I should think. Secretary of State voted against funding for Ukraine pretty recently, in part of his evolution from neocon to more populist in Rubio. Tulsi's not a fan at DNI, although won't necessarily have too much input over direct application of foreign policy. But the other part of Rubio that I like is, we have a huge problem with Latin America, and Rubio can go down there and speak to them and their audiences in their native language. Not in Brazil, of course, but close.
There's going to be a major conflict, at least from my perspective, which is that on the one hand, Trump is all about blocking foreign imports and putting tariffs on them. But on the other hand, we finally have a Cuban in that role. So maybe we can at last lift the embargo on cigars. And that would truly, if that happens, I'm for putting Trump on Mount Rushmore if he can figure it. Last time he was in, he made scotch more expensive, which was perhaps one of the only things I really deplored about his previous administration. But no, I mean, so we should mention that Trump is asking for recess appointments in this whole field, which, I think technically that's allowed. It's just, it would be very unusual and probably, as you say, Ryan, it would be a major abdication of authority for the Senate to allow that and for Congress to kind of give that over to him. Plus, he's coming in with a Republican Senate, so it would perhaps not be worth it in terms of his goodwill and his reputation. But the trade-off is that if they don't give him that, then yeah, guys like Gates might have a hard time getting through. I'm sort of interested, like Seth, you and I were talking about this a little before we started recording. Before Trump won, one of the major scary talking points that Democrats were using to warn voters about the impending authoritarian fascism of the Trump 2024 election was that he was going to just only care about loyalty, that his entire selection process was only going to care about loyalty. And they've sort of continued this narrative in the press a little bit about that. I really liked Mike Solana had a tweet in response, which was, wow, I can't believe he's breaking with the long established precedent of surrounding yourself with people who hate your fucking guts, which is pretty funny. Like, I mean, obviously you get people that like you, that believe in your mission or want to execute in your sort of coterie, but actually looking at this from a bit of a holistic perspective and thinking about all these people together, yeah, they all in some way can work with Trump, but they by no means all agree with him about everything. Many of them have difficult histories with him, including J.D. Vance, and even Tulsi Gabbard obviously has taken him to task. Marco Rubio, and he had some big fights back in the day. I mean, Rubio even has one of the famous nicknames, right? He was Little Marco. And so
Whittle Marco.
Widow Marco. And so there's that. Plus there's the fact that these guys represent like possibly every possible camp within the Republican Party except the Never Trumpers, but including some of the ex-lib converts like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. So is this not just, did it not turn out that he's actually doing the opposite of the loyalty? He's like kind of creating this whole new party that's not entirely based on him.
Well, I think what he's doing is bringing in people who are, this is kind of like the administration that we'd hoped for in 2017. None of these people are swamp creatures, really. And by bringing in like Hegseth in defense, okay, arguably that's like probably his most controversial pick so far, I think. People are saying, why is a guy who was like a National Guard platoon commander running the Defense Department? Now, there is something to this. I mean, typically, like your classic Defense Department people like Rumsfeld, McNamara, Pillars, these types. These are people who ran like massive organizations, like the Ford Company, or you've got like the guy that's in there now. He's like a 4-star general, Lloyd Austin. So, yes, that's a little strange. I mean, the Pentagon is this massive organization, incredibly complicated, but he is dedicated to changing the institution. So, in a way, you kind of have to take a gamble and put somebody in who who's familiar with the institution and has a strong commitment to changing it. And I think that's a lot of what he's trying to do here is really upend the swamp and like tip it over and get some of these people, in who are really committed to changing it. Like Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, she's basically like kind of like a Glenn Greenwald type when it comes to the intelligence community. I don't know if Kash Patel is ever going to wind up anywhere in there, but the way he talks about transparency, openness, RFK Jr. certainly, Vivek and Elon, I don't know exactly what their Doge department is going to ultimately do, but I think that's like that's the through line, right? Like these are people who are committed to draining the swamp. And Trump has stayed fair, and Matt Gaetz, certainly. It's just so interesting because this is so much of a better administration than we would have had if he had won in 2020.
That is really an important point, yes.
If he had won in 2020, they would have just kept on with the impeachments. He would have been hampered by COVID for the next 2 years or longer. They would have kept that going. And nothing would have happened. It would have been like just a disaster of a second term. Getting this like non-consecutive second term where he's coming back in, he has experience, he's been president, so he knows how the job works. And he had 4 years of relentless persecution, which has completely hardened him.
Okay, dude, yeah. I went on a show after the election night. So like the day after the election, just an immediate reaction show. And it was it was not a religious show, but it was a religious guy who was talking to me about this. And he said, I personally believe that God withheld Donald Trump from us for 4 years because he needed to be taken away so that we could see how bad things got if we went the other direction and that Trump could regroup. And honestly, I think that's a perfectly legitimate interpretation of what happened. I mean, after the assassination attempt, when his head swiveled like by one acute angle and he survived, I thought there's obviously a surgical precision going on in this story where like everything that happens is the most dramatic possible thing, but also possibly the best of all possible worlds, like in the end. And I feel like this is a really important feature of all of this is he genuinely seems to have gone away and learned and reconsidered.
I agree. I think that there's something to that. To me, yes, the whole thing does strike me as somewhat, I don't know, it kind of has like the feeling of the prodigal son or some kind of other biblical parable. The fact that like what was lost is now returned. I mean, whatever. It's just, it doesn't really register with anything worldly as a narrative. I mean, it really points to the miraculous. But maybe that's a little extreme.
Seth, a quick New York aside, and I'm stealing the comic aspect of this from the commentary podcast. how long till Eric Adams shows up at Mar-a-Lago in a MAGA hat?
I mean, that's the way he's portrayed here. And, I think I never got the sense that Eric Adams was necessary. I mean, Eric Adams does not come off as like an anti-Trump like lunatic the way, say, like de Blasio did. It wouldn't surprise me if he actually voted for him. But yeah, I mean, whether he's going to show up there, I don't know. But he is he did ask for his trial to be rescheduled earlier, which you never really like. His trial was scheduled for late April, and he said, "Can we just do it in early April?" Which who does that? So he might feel confident about something. I don't know. It's a good question.
Well, there is going to be probably a split, right, in the Democratic Party between people who have made their entire career and image about anathematizing Trump and who therefore cannot, in good faith, without just totally betraying everything that they've said over the past 8 years, can't work with Trump, treat him like a regular figure. And then all the other people who were in whose interest it was to persist in the hashtag resistance and to kind of be on the anti-Trump train, but who will now sort of reveal by their actions that this is a Republican president and they're going to work with him. So I think weirdly, because we've been through all of the sky is falling stuff and now it has turned out to be fine, you are going to get a lot of people who have, as they say, a permission structure to kind of jump ship from the resistance and just, if not become MAGA themselves, then accept MAGA as a force to be reckoned with.
Well, you don't hear the same stuff about this is an illegitimate president that has to be like resisted and destroyed and countered at every turn. I mean, I'm sorry. I kind of feel like Biden, people have talked about this obviously a lot, that Biden sabotaging Kamala's run and like just sort of sabotaging the Democrats generally for having like shoved him out and then turning around and endorsing Kamala before Obama and Pelosi and Schumer got a chance to come up with alternate arrangements. I mean, I don't know. It kind of feels like Biden is doing everything he can to sort of normalize Trump.
Emmett Penny, friend of the pod, sent me a tweet with a picture of Biden's speech after the election. And it just said, "This is the look of a guy who just watched his carjacker get T-boned by a garbage truck." And I think that's amazing. Well, this is a great segue into the next thing we should talk about, which is this, the postmortem on the left. And we should talk about it because it is simply delicious. And even though celebration time will soon be over and we'll all be getting to work on a good administration, we shouldn't let this moment pass us by without relishing the sweetness of it in every possible way. And one way is to just listen in, as I've been doing almost nonstop since we spoke last, to Pod Save America, to the 538 podcast, to the Slate Political Gabfest, reading the New Republic. I mean, my diet of left-wing media has never been healthier, let me tell you. And I genuinely think it's also interesting and will tell us something about where the Democrat Party goes after this, to watch. For me, the big spectator sport is, can they bite the bullet and admit that they basically turned all of America off with their cuckoo bananas social craziness? Like, they are so committed philosophically, or were so committed philosophically, to transing the kids and everything associated with that, that they really have basically two choices ahead of them, I think. And you can hear in the voices of the people discussing this, those who realize what has to be done and haven't yet brought themselves to it, and those who are studiously, furiously committed to not realizing this. So there's the possibility of saying, you know what, we actually whiffed it on this. We need to back way off, just leave people alone about the social stuff, and we need to present our economic ideas and just make a strong argument that we are the party of the working class again. And then the people who are like, absolutely not, it is the children who are wrong, and this was a messaging problem. This is because the right-wing news media has been allowed to become so powerful that it pulled the wool over everybody's eyes, and it somehow convinced all of these gullible dupes that Kamala Harris wants to trans prison inmates. Like, who could possibly believe that? And they say this because they think that like their version of Kamala that they invented after she was put into the candidacy is the only version that anybody sees. Like, they still sort of, some of them still sort of think that they can just will these creations into being and erase like all the other reality. And some of them have caught on to the fact that no, actually, Joe Rogan is the media now, or as Elon keeps saying about X, like, you are the media now. So this is the big question in front of me. Is like, are they going to like grapple with that seriously? My inclination is no. I mean, I remember after 2016 when there was this huge introspection about how have we lost all of these working class voters, and then it basically vanished almost immediately into this was all about racism and we must resist at every turn. But I'm curious, like, what your guys' take has been on, or what you've observed on the left, and we should get to talking about some of the much more deranged and less sober reactions as well. But what do you make of it?
Well, what I think is really funny is, yes, you hear all these people saying, like, this isn't fair because we've always been the lunch bucket party. The Democrats are the party of the working class. And how did we cede this ground to them? It's like, well, you just gave it up. You just said you weren't really interested in it anymore. You know, money in politics. They stopped talking about that as soon as like all the billionaires went on their side. You know, so they're against tariffs, they're against all that stuff. So they can say that they want to reclaim it, but how do they do that? One thing, their party has embraced intersectionality so deeply. It's so much an essential part of the fabric of their party and their coalition that you can't really get away from it. I mean, Kamala Harris made it very clear that economic equity means race-based redistribution of resources. And this is like essential. You know, I just want to say, like, Matt Iglesias, the Democrat writer, he came up with this new Democratic manifesto. He says, for an inclusive big tent party. And if you read it, it's just the economic self-interest for the working class includes both economic growth and a robust social safety net. Government should prioritize maintaining functional public system and spaces over tolerating antisocial behavior, blah, blah, blah. It's all MAGA. It's basically the MAGA manifesto. So, okay, welcome to the party. I don't think they have much room to maneuver.
Totally. We have a common sense party at home, right? It's the one that Trump has been building. Yeah, they just won like, en masse at every level, like in every demographic. They just won a landslide victory. And the only thing stopping like Matt Iglesias from admitting that is that then he's a Trumpist. Oh my gosh, not a Trumpist, right? Like, then suddenly there's this name that they've built up into. That's the last avenue that they closed off for themselves, I feel, with all of this mishigas about like he's Hitler, he's fascist, he's going to end democracy. Well, okay, but so now he's won and he basically wants all of the things that you claim to want. And if he's hoovered up all of that branding, like if that platform just belongs to him, then your only option is to become a fascist. And that's not a very good option unless you admit you were wrong about all that the whole time.
There's an analog to this to the more mild interpretation, Spencer, which was an exhibit on one of your podcasts and that you sent, and on the Pod Save America one, which is, look, she had an uphill battle. Biden was going to get shellacked even before the debate. Kamala ran a solid campaign. You know, it was within the margin of error on all the polls. None were really off that much, 2 to 3 points. We predicted that wherever it swung, and it could swing either way, they'd probably carry all the swing states, et cetera, et cetera. And now there's a certain truth to this. There's a quantitative truth to this. It was a narrowly won election by Trump. I mean, they don't talk at all about the more notable shifts amongst their key demographics, which we'll get to. So their immediate interpretation of the election is not crazy in the sense that it was narrowly won, and Trump and his team can certainly overread that. And if I think they should be very careful about over venturing into policy areas that are a bit edgy or marginal in terms of the national electorate because they have to look up to a midterm coming up. All that being said, the interpretation seems fantastically almost directionally wrong. Whereas, they need to staunch this bleeding and turn the corner and become a more normal party, especially on cultural issues, where you could see this kind of cascading effect across the electorate as they lead into the midterms. So it's, I suspect, if Trump's team and he are savvy, they would continue to drive this wedge into the Democratic Party and try to freak out and provoke the left wing of the party to keep going and going. Although, there are some data points that even the left wing part of the party is ready to do some soul searching. AOC is asking what podcasts she should listen to that are pro Trump to get a sense of the new media zeitgeist.
Yeah, but they did this. They did this in 2016 too. I mean, it was like it's easy to forget because it then became such a virulently anti-Trump left. But this was the whole thing in this stage of the win after 2016 was like, what have we missed? How can we understand Middle America better? Like, but I will say, yeah, I mean, maybe we should link to this one Pod Save America episode that did have some interesting discussions in it with this woman, Sarah Longwell of the Bulwark. So it was like Pod Save America with the Obama bros with the Never Trumper kind of talking about focus groups and what people liked and didn't like. And like, it's important, Ryan, what you're saying about like, I think it's important to be specific about what kind of mandate this is, because a common talking point on the left seems to be there is no mandate. This was a tight election. It could easily have gone the other direction. And so Trump would be crazy to interpret it as a sort of resounding vindication from the public. And I think that's true in the sense that Trump has not received a mandate to like go full Groyper. Like this was not a victory really for the edgelord online coalition of people that seemed ascendant in the 2016 win. But it's not the case in the sense of like, if you think of the MAGA party as this broader, like new neo-fusionist hodgepodge of a variety of interests that includes like the Tulsi Gabbards and the RFKs alongside some of the ex-neocons or neocons, like that party seems to be just like definitively popular among the people. And like, this is the thing that I feel you can't get around with like better or more messaging. You can't just pretend to be a party that can appeal to the broad swath of normal people that seem to be going for Trump. You actually have to appeal to them somehow, which, like, as Seth was saying, I'm not sure how you do that.
The representative data point of this possibly being a directional shift that could be substantial. This was from, it doesn't matter who the post was from, but the New York Times spoke to 13 young undecided voters for months leading up to the election. Here's one of those 13 young voters from McLean in DC, 25 years old, white, legal field, wrote in Romney in 2020. So this sounds like an independent or maybe a new independent because of Trump. This is her quote. I shocked myself and voted for Trump. No one tell my family. I was so impressed by J.D. Vance, the way he carried himself and how normal he appeared. I think I became radicalized on the men and women's sports issue. The ad that said Kamala represents they, them, Trump represents you. That was so compelling. While Trump is deranged, he represented normalcy somehow to me.
Yeah, that sounds about right, and this thing where those people are like, they just happen to have kind of lined up on the side of Trump this time, and next time it'll be, I mean, because another line that we're getting is incumbent parties everywhere are getting a spanking because inflation and because all of this and that and the wars and so forth. And so really this is just a global change election. And the problem with this is the change is all against stuff that Biden caused to happen, right? I mean, it is the Biden policies that people are fed up with. They're fed up with this like gaping border. They're fed up with the price of eggs. They're fed up with all these things that like Biden didn't even particularly pretend not to be doing. Like, it's not like, oh, you could assign blame here or there to Trump or Biden for the border. And depending on how you look at it, because they were both trying to have a closed border. It was like, no, Biden had totally other priorities and repeatedly demonstrated that he actually didn't care or even was happy for the border to be open. And so if that's a major issue that people are like reacting against, then the change election is to change the Democrats out of power. I wonder like where the sort of hardcore resistors fit into all of this, because we should talk about like Seth, you brought up the 4B movement, which I guess is this like Korean. So correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but I guess in South Korea, for some reason that, so help me, remains obscure. I can't find anybody explaining why exactly it is that South Korean women are so upset about something or other. But they are refusing to sleep with men, basically, on the basis of the fact that they are upset. And so now this has become a reaction on the part of like TikTok girls that they're not going to sleep with men because they voted against abortion or something. Am I getting that right?
Basically, yeah, I think in South Korea, like South Korea is a very conservative, culturally conservative society. But, you know, I think women have a fair amount of economic power there, and they're a little bit disgruntled about certain gender role expectations. So yes, they've embraced the 4B movement, which means like the four no's, like no dating, no sex. Yeah, so you see all these women here doing it. I mean, but it's like that old joke about why the war of the sexes always fails, because there's too much fraternization. I mean, okay, so say a few women say that they're not going to sleep with men. Well, there's plenty of women who are there to take up the mantle, you know, and do the job for them. And I guess a lot of them are getting, some of them, not a lot, people are like, I'm going to shave my head to show men that I'm not interested in being the object of their gaze. Well, look, if they were really serious about it, they would get like really hideous face tattoos and vow to put on 150 pounds. I'm sorry, just getting like kind of a cute pixie cut isn't gonna do it. Like, I don't think that these women are that serious about their to me this lasts like a week. Like this vow to like give up on dating, sex, whatever.
And they're exacerbating a national problem for them, which is you can read some stuff, some demographic analysis of the red states leading into the 2030 census. It does not look good for Democrats in blue states, partly because the fertility rate is higher in red states, and also because women with higher, on average, higher TFR are moving to red states out of blue states. So yeah, but I'm with you, Seth. I suspect that, you know, as much as you want to toss nature out with a pitchfork, it will heal, and pretty quickly,
I'm just pulling my Aristophanes, you know, off the shelf for
as one does.
no apparent reason. Our listeners can't see me, but right behind me, I have Aaron Puchigian's relatively new translation of 4 plays, including Lysistrata, which is about exactly this and fails for exactly the reason you're actually, I guess, now that I think about it, like Aristophanes is a little bit more sanguine about the prospects of a sex strike ending a war than we're being. But the whole joke in the play is that you can try, but it turns out like women kind of like men kind of like women. You know, I've been told, you know, it's very popular amongst their respective interest groups, and so also, and the other part of it, of course, is like this is exactly what some conservatives want. Is like, oh, you're going to ban abortion? Well, I'm just not going to sleep with a man unless he loves me, marries me, and pays for my child support. Like, correct. That is exactly the point. Yeah. So this is all very like amusing, but I know this is squishy of me. I see all of these people shrieking in their bedrooms over the election. And it makes me think about myself at the dawn of the Biden age when I was genuinely down. I mean, I think we were all pretty demoralized by that 2020 election. And I did not shriek in my room or film myself doing it, but I felt quite upset. And then I realized that this was in part a way to learn to like be a happy warrior, to take joy in things that aren't politics, to not invest your entire hopes and dreams in national federal politics, to look at state elections or whatever. And I genuinely find myself wanting to just talk to some of these people for just a second and just be like, you know what? Water your plants, feed your dog, talk to your boyfriend if you've got one. Sometimes you're going to see a news story you don't love. It's going to be okay, right? It's going to be just fine. And I do feel like I have a piece that I hope will come through for the American Mind that I've commissioned about, like, by a therapist, just about what this means for mental health. Because really, we're looking at people that have been terrorized by powerful interests who don't particularly care about them, but who are now, they're having like mental breakdowns. It's really bad.
Yeah. A few data points. I mean, Mark Halperin said that if Trump wins, this will be one of the largest, if not the largest, public mental health crisis in the history of America, and we're certainly observing it. The other thing too, Spencer, is like we can put it on the gender divide too. It seems like the freakouts are disproportionately female for abortion issue reasons, among others, and just temperament on average. I think, if I may be a gross simplifying sexist, as the left would describe it, but we all knew conservative women who didn't want the Biden regime in for all sorts of reasons. And they had basically the same reaction as we did in 2020, which is like the next day you wake up, you go to work. I mean, you're kind of bummed for a few weeks, and then you get back in the fight. Or you just, if you do this for a living, you get back in the fight. If you don't, you just go on with your life. And all this, I wonder if all this anecdata we're seeing is also part of the Democrats' problem, because the independents around these people, especially maybe not diehard Republicans, are going to view, it was some leading academic. I saw him tweet the other day. My aunt asked me what Thanksgiving plans were, and she mentioned that she voted for Trump, and I told her I don't take traitors into my house, and I won't be attending her Thanksgiving either. And it's just, I think most normal Americans, when they see this sort of thing, the last one was this, Corey D'Angelo made this big in recent days on Twitter. There was some high school teacher in California with a very Latino student body who went on this rant that some kid recorded, where he basically said, many of you have Latino fathers and uncles who voted for Trump, and they did it really because they just want to be white, and it's sexist and racist. And they had a school board meeting recently, and it was like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different parents, all Latino as far as I could tell, just saying, this is outrageous. We're Latino. We don't want to be white. Like I'm a Latino father, and my brother, we all voted for Trump. The whole family voted for Trump. This is ridiculous. The man's a racist. So the accumulation of this freak out is not going to bode well for Democrats either, amongst their neighbors who might otherwise entertain voting for Democrats in the future.
Yeah, they want to be white only in this meaning that the left has attached to that term, right? There is a sense of whiteness that those Latinos really do believe in. It's just like back when Smithsonian, for instance, was putting out like infographics about how whiteness means valuing punctuality and hard work and the belief in universal values and absolute truth. It's like, yeah, if that's what whiteness is, I suspect like a lot of Latinos do want to be white, to which I say, come on in. The water's fine. Like, this is one of the most appealing racial elections actually I've lived through, in that it's sort of the return of OG colorblindness, because actual whiteness of the kind that like we mean when we say white, we just mean of a Caucasian race. That kind of whiteness seems to be almost irrelevant to these people. The more people come over and vote Trump, the more it feels like, I don't know, it feels like we've been living through a period when the left's insistence on race as the most important, maybe the only important thing, like the defining aspect of American politics, that seemed so powerful and so successful basically from 2020 onward, that even on the right, we were starting to be like, well, like, do we need to sort of get on board with this somehow? Do we need to acknowledge that colorblindness is impossible, that all we can really hope for is a sort of comfortable détente between the races? And my feeling about that was like, okay, well, if that's what we have to do because we live in this imperfect world and we have this difficult history with race, then fine. But that's really not my ideal. Like, I would love for us all to just like sweep this garbage away. And maybe this is a way to shift into talking about the last topic we have here, which is the crosstabs and the demographics of the Trump vote in this election. But it's like this. I feel better than I've felt in a while about just like boomer colorblindness as a model for the American attitude. Now I know that there are like limitations to that, and that we all do sort of see color, but just the idea that there could be an American identity that is defined by all the things that the left wants to call whiteness, but is really just like sort of red-blooded common sense.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody who wants to be included in that is kind of an American patriot. That looks, I don't know, more promising than it looked 2 weeks ago to me.
Yeah, I agree to some extent. I think that the left just lies and projects. So I kind of feel like, if you let them just do it for long enough, eventually you get the sense that they're just screaming. So, they will never stop talking about how Trump is a racist, but it just doesn't really work. I mean, what does he do or say that's racist? I mean, is he a 78-year-old man American who like he speaks bluntly or crudely about things sometimes? Yeah, but he's not like, there's just no evidence that he's a racist. And I think eventually people are like, get tired of hearing it and maybe start listening to themselves. Like Amber Rose said at the convention, she assumed he was a racist, and then she was challenged. Well, just listen to what he says, and you poke around, you don't really find any racism. When it's just this term of art that the Democrats use to indicate, well, he's not on board with all of our equitarian programs. I think that worked to some extent. I mean, I know we want to get into the demographic shifts and whatnot, but especially among Latinos, I don't know. I mean, that's pretty significant that like almost half of Latinos voted for Trump. And I don't know if that's going to go away.
No, I don't think it is.
2024 presidential election, a big win for cultural whiteness.
100%.
As that term's used as an epithet by the left against.
It's the Whiteshift election.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking now at the Tufts data about young people, especially. And young people, I mean, young people and racial minorities are sort of the entire Democrat Party's electoral model, as far as I can tell. And both swung right. In fact, young men basically voted for Trump. I mean, Trump actually won young men. He didn't win young women, but they moved right too. And I'm just looking now at the breakdown by race. 11-point swing among young white men toward Republicans. 6 points among young white women. 20-point swing among young black men. That is, black men under 30 moved 20 points to the right this election. Black women again 6. Latino men 13. Latino women 9. All other races 1. And that is probably the scariest graph for the Democrats out of this election that I have yet seen. We should talk also about the one, Ryan, you sent by. Do you want to talk about this status graph too?
Oh, yeah, let me pull it back up. But in the meantime, I'll blather on about and plug our friend Peachy Keenan.
Yeah.
Has a piece in the Federalist out right now. Let's hear it for the straight white boys who saved us from Kamala. Yeah. So, right, the security gap. This is according to AP's VoteCast survey, exit survey. Less secure groups swing right, more secure groups hold steady. I think, economic security, et cetera. Black men, a 25% shift. Non-white, 18 to 44, a 21% shift. Non-white, non-college men, 21% shift. 18 to 29, Latino men, 18 to 44, non-college, non-white, urban, African-American or black, Latino or Hispanic. That's all 21, 19, 17, 16, 15, 14% swings. And then at the other end, the negative swings, that is swing towards Democrats, 4 categories at 4%, 4%, 2%, 1%, postgraduate study, white urban, white college men, and white people over 45, and then a couple neutral, no swing at all. Married men, that's makes a lot of sense, I guess. They're a pretty static group, and 65 or over. It's pretty interesting. Urban and suburban both swung 4% and 5% respectively towards Republicans.
that is just, I mean, and this is where, one of my favorite personal pastimes is harassing Ibram X. Kendi and Nicole Hannah Jones on Twitter. It's just, it's good for my blood pressure. But I've seen them both like just coping so hard because what we're talking about basically just destroys their entire argument. Like the whole premise of their career is that America is irredeemably racist and the Republicans represent the irredeemably racist American values that built this country. And now, as the Democrats are starting to think, gee, maybe wokeness is a problem for us, the line from the race hucksters is, that's racist, of course. Wokeness isn't the problem. It's, economic insecurity and racism that you're covering over by blaming social progressives. And so I love to just drop these charts in their replies because, like, this is not only an electoral problem, this is a philosophical problem for the Democrats. It's like, if the people that they claim to champion increasingly flock to the person they claim is their oppressor, they really have like this whole argument just turns out to be smoke and vapor. And it's not clear to me what the modern Democrat Party is without that argument. This is, to me, their big problem is, I can see how you could have a Democrat Party in this country that was not really all that into woke politics. I can't see how the same people that currently operate the Democrat Party can make that pivot without invalidating their entire careers to date. And this stuff is just like, I don't know, it looks kind of deadly. But am I being too bullish?
No, I mean, again, directionally, not at all. The devil will be in a lot of details. But we should add that every state in the union, except for Washington, swung right. Well, a lot of them just barely, but a lot significantly. Kamala Harris won New Jersey by 6 points, which has led Scott Pressler to say he's going to turn New Jersey into a proper swing state between now and the midterms, and he might get it done. So, my joke is that Thomas Frank's 2004 book, What's the Matter with Kansas? How Conservatives Won the Heart of America. He needs to update it. It's now, What's the Matter with 49 States? How, I guess MAGA populism is making inroads with America against, and his argument is embodied in I suspect would be the worry and perplexity that Democrats might feel to this security shift chart that we were just talking about, which is, why are all these people voting against their economic interests?
Right. And that it's just so,
that book's 20 years old now, so it's I mean, he should reprise it. Maybe he'll have figured it out by now, but he's got a lot of data to work with in the direction that he lamented 20 years ago.
well, I always thought that there was something so smug about that book.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of saying that people are voting against their own interests. It's like, oh, unlike you, like, oh, so not only what your interest is, but their interest. Somebody else's interest too. I don't think anybody's really going to vote against their own interest.
No, by definition, they don't, right?
Right.
I mean, you can say that, but
read the first line of Aristotle's Ethics. Come on, people. Sorry.
Right. It's kind of like talking about how, one of my favorite things was Alan Lichtman, the guy with the 13 keys to the presidency, who was on TV, like constantly talking about his 13 keys, which are totally subjective and idiotic. And then when they asked him, well, why did it go wrong? And he said, well, it didn't. It's just that the electorate was so beclouded and befuddled by disinformation that they didn't understand that all of the things that I said were correct. Like they thought the opposite. So the electorate just got it wrong, but really it was right. It's the same way that people who will go on about like, oh, there's so much misinformation, except you somehow know what's right. Like the people complaining about misinformation never are subject to it themselves. Like they have like their minds are fine enough to like figure it out. So it's just It's ridiculous.
They have Hegelian distance from their current moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they can just talk about white adjacency until there's nobody left but them. That's sort of their program, just to say, oh, you're just okay. Latinos who think they're white, blacks who want to be white. This is like the Joy Reid line. Just seems like it's a dead end.
Speaking of Joy Reid, it's somewhat breaking news. Comcast is trying to sell MSNBC because their ratings have tanked over the last week. And so it's led to this meme on the internet where so-and-so could do the funniest thing, which is kind of like to get back at their enemies through opportunity. And maybe Elon will buy MSNBC. And the LA Times has now fired its entire editorial board, the owner, and wants to retool so that they're back. I mean, he's just following the market. It makes sense for a news organization. It's a marvel that none of the others have figured it out.
It would be hilarious to get a conservative MSNBC. On one level or another, right? These guys are going to have to reckon with this or just become sort of pet projects for leftist gajillionaires. I mean, I guess some left-wing outlets already are that, but this is sort of the election. It's interesting to me about this press dimension of it. I think all three of us and general people on the right side of things who have spent a lot of time watching media and are really like online brained and just paying attention. For us, it feels like a really long time that new media has been more interesting, more accurate, more rigorous, and less hidebound to conventional wisdom than the traditional media. Like, it's been a long time that you can get better social science on Twitter if you know where to look than at the Associated Press. But the accumulated capital and credentials of the other legacy institutions were so great that for a while it felt like, well, you can be as smart and interesting as you want on X or on Substack or wherever. You're never going to reach as many people. You're never going to have as much influence and power and matter as much as the New York Times or whatever. And with Rogan fully flipping right and with Elon fully flipping right, I think this is the first election where the thing that we have all seen happening is now the fundamental reality about the media space. It's that the frog has been boiling and boiling and boiling, and now the frog has just passed over from the binary state of alive to dead. And it's kind of awesome. Like, it's just, and it's awesome to see the bewilderment on the smug faces of Joy Reid and company, because they never noticed it. They never saw it coming. You know, they spent all this time laughing and sort of waving that off as if it were just quote unquote misinformation. And now it's the news.
Yeah. When just to call back to our earlier thing about the left kind of gaslighting themselves. Another important data point too is that, okay, so it's a close election and you're facing headwinds.
Yeah.
You'd think that you could overcome that if you outspent your opponent 3-1 with $1 billion war chest. And yet, no.
No, indeed. And yet no. That's a perfect ending for this podcast. Nevertheless, they did not persist. They failed. Okay. Well, it's laughing gas around here these days. So thanks for joining me on it, you guys, and thanks to all of you for listening to the Roundtable. If you like the work that we do here, you will love to learn more about our various projects at the American Mind, americanmind.org, at the Claremont Review of Books, claremontreviewofbooks.com, and at our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life, dc.claremont.org. You can donate to support us. We do not have $1 billion war chest to spend down irresponsibly on Oprah.
Oh, if only.
Podcast spots. But Oprah, if your people are listening, hit me up. I'd love to chat. No, we rely on the kindness of strangers and the generosity of our benefactors. So please do go to claremont.org/donate and help us out. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, the brothers G, Jake and Ryan Gannon. And thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.